Welcome to another edition of Media One-on-One. I'm Perry Parks, your host. We continue today with our series Election Campaign 98 with one of the most important and much talked about initiatives on this year's ballot, Proposition 227, the Bilingual Education Initiative. In a short capsule, the measurement calls for public school instruction to be in English. It provides for an initial short-term placement not normally to exceed 1 year. And intensive English immersion programs for non-English speaking children. It appropriates $50 million per year for up to 10 years for English instruction to non-English speaking adults who pledge to tutor immigrant children in their communities. And it also permits enforcement suits by parents. With us is a distinguished panel of guests to help us shed some light and insight on this proposition from both sides and from for and against the initiative. Jose Delgadillo is a teacher on leave while he serves as a spokesperson for UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles, who are against Proposition 227. Our next guest is Maribel Medina, staff attorney for MALDEF, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, also against 227. And our third guest is Henry Gradillas, past principal of Garfield High School, now representing English for the Children, who supports the initiative. I urge you to participate in today's program. Call in your questions and talk back live with our guests. The call-in number is area code 310-216-3590. Again, that's area code 310-216-3590. Before we open our discussion with our panel, I'd like to share an interview with you that I recently did in Washington, D.C. with Congressman Xavier Becerra. In my discussion with the congressman, I asked him to give us a capsule overview of what Proposition 227 is and to talk to us about some of the inner workings of it and what really is at stake with the Bilingual Education Initiative.
In that 10-second soundbite, Proposition 227, the UNS initiative, would eliminate what we call bilingual education. And bilingual education can take many forms. It's not just giving kids who don't speak English well instruction in their native language. It's all sorts of different types of learning tools that are used. But the UNS initiative would kill that and say, let's use this one approach and only this one approach of 1 year of study for that child in English, and then put them into a classroom where it's all English, and hope that all these kids, age 5, age 10, all put together in the same classroom would have to learn.
Well, let's see if we can explore that soundbite a little bit, Javier. What is the current model that we're working in terms of bilingual education, which is a lot broader, I'm thinking?
There's no one model. There is one premise. A child who does not have a facility in English or any other language can learn that language and other material, other subjects, best if transitioned into that main language. What we have right now, for example, is a situation where a child may know a little bit of English, but not enough to know the technical aspects of the language. So what you do is you help that child with the native language, and over the course of maybe 2-3 years or so, you transition the child. And at the same time the child is learning English, the child's also had a chance to learn geography, science, math, so that when the child does transition into English, the child hasn't all of a sudden also fallen behind on science, math, geography. Other tools that are used are what are called the full immersion program, where you actually immerse them completely in an English instruction classroom. But you give them a lot of attention, because obviously they're not understanding a lot of what's being said early on. And that usually runs you a few years as well, because what you're doing is you're totally consuming the child in English, but you're being attentive because you know the child is not capturing quite a bit of what's being said, at least early on.
So it looks like then from a time point of view, you're talking about a multiple year program, maybe 3 or 4 versus 1, just in terms of time.
It could be 1 year for a child who's got some grasp of English, or it's a quick study. It could be 4 years for others. A lot depends not on the child, but on the teacher. If we don't have a teacher who can teach that language, you're going to have a problem.
All right, so then let's talk a little bit about how effective that program has been over the years. How effective has the traditional program been over the years?
Well, you're going to run into people saying it's been totally ineffective, and some would say it's totally effective.
But you said the premise.
Right, the premise.
So let's talk about how effective the premise has been then, because I think there are room
The experts will tell you, those who study language acquisition will tell you the premise is sound. Yo te puedo hablar en español en este momento y tú no me, tal vez me vas a comprender. I don't know if you caught anything what I just said.
Something about understanding. That's about all I got right.
Well, that's what you throw a 5 or 6 or an 8-year-old into. Now, you're an adult. You can probably handle the emotions of that, the psychosis of that.
Barely. But
Now think of a 7-year-old child. What kind of trauma does that cause? What you try to do is say to the child, I'm going to transition you so that what I just said, you'll understand completely, and I'm going to say it in English. But I don't want you, while you're focusing so much and trying to learn English, to forget that you have to also learn math and science and geography. Bilingual education says, let's do that transition as quickly as possible so that child within 3 years or so, 2 years, maybe 4 years, will be in a totally English-only environment and succeeding along with his or her peers.
So then, so the premise is working, and we have results, I would assume, in terms of numbers that are educated and have made that transition that we can point to as well. Are you familiar with any of those?
Sure, you can point to particular schools that have very good success rates with their children. You can also point to other schools that don't have a good success rate, and that's been the problem. You can point to some of those schools where the kids aren't learning quickly enough, aren't capturing not just the English, but also not enough math or science, and we see it becoming a trip or a path to nowhere for these children. And that's what's caused, I think, so much of this fervor to eliminate bilingual ed. But unfortunately, as we were discussing before we came on the air, do you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do you really want a system for about 1.5 million children in California, of the 6 million or so children in California who are in school, where those children will get 1 year of intensive English, and after that 1 year, it's sink or swim. You now have to go into the mainstream classroom. My problem with that is, does that child learn quickly enough with the rest of his or her peers, or does the teacher say, I've got to slow down the classroom so I don't lose this child? One way or the other, the teacher has to make a decision.
Well, there are a couple of things that seem to come to me. It seems to me that you're going to lose some anyway, because out of 100 kids, you're not going to get 100 that are going to move at the same pace.
Right.
So are there implications for increased dropout and then increased other social problems that are attendant to people that are dropping out of school? What is the
I'd say yes.
prognosis on that?
I'd say yes. We could take off our jackets right now, and yours would not fit me, and mine would not fit you. But the UNS initiative says this method of teaching has to fit every child in the state. Not just those who are limited English proficient, but every child, because remember, those kids who are limited English proficient get thrown into the regular classroom after 1 year. Everything has to fit every child the same way. If it's too big or too small for you, tough luck, because by law we will require that they all be in the same classroom.
So it seems to me that you're pointing to the fact that this isn't a policy issue, which an initiative is designed to create or fashion, that this is more akin to a management or implementation issue, maybe at specific sites, because you said that there are sites that are working, there are sites that aren't. Has anyone really spoken to that particular aspect of the issue?
I believe you're beginning to see folks try to really be more surgical in their approach. It's the mechanics, you're right. It's not the substance, the policy behind the premise of bilingual education. It's the mechanics, how it's implemented. And what you're finding more and more in the recent action by the state school board to try to allow local school districts to have more decision-making about how they implement programs for bilingual ed. All of that's to say, let people at the heart of the issue, those who are actually teaching day-to-day at that site, decide how best to do it. Now, there's a concern that some sites will say, well, we don't need anything, and we won't really pay attention to these children. But I think more and more, because of the attention that bilingual education is getting, I think you'll find that local school districts and the schools will really be attentive to how to best serve that child's needs.
Now, you've devoted a lot of time to this issue, Xavier, and it seems to be a decidedly local issue. You're in a position in Congress where you're dealing with national policy. Why the attention to this particular issue, other than, then you're from Los Angeles and California, but in your position as a congressman, national policy is kind of the scope. Why the attention to such a local issue?
Remember that what happens in California, sooner or later will happen throughout the rest of the nation. That's one thing about California. We are a leader in so many different ways. We are the bellwether in so many different issues. So whatever we do in California, chances are at some point it'll ripple all the way through the country. Secondly, I can take you, we can leave right now, take off these mics, and travel no more than 5 or 7 miles, and I'll show you a bilingual education school here in Washington, D.C. And one, by the way, that's won national recognition for some of the work it's done in a city that has a lot of poor kids. I can take you about another 5 miles from there and take you to several schools that have bilingual programs because of the increasing number of children that we find who are limited English proficient, not necessarily not knowledgeable of English, but limited in their knowledge, and unless we do something to get them going, we'll lose them in the long run.
So we know in Los Angeles and California that Spanish and Spanish immigrants and the influx of Spanish immigrants is a growing population. That's not the only language issue. And how diverse has the language issue become in the country? We used to be able to say it was Spanish-English, and it was primarily a Southwestern, if you would, issue. How diverse is the language issue in this country now?
Let me tell you, you've got everything from Armenian, and in Los Angeles you've got a large Armenian population. You've got the Chinese dialects, not just one Mandarin language, but Chinese dialects. You've got the whole issue of all the Eastern Europeans that have come recently. Now, remember, bilingual education doesn't say you have to teach each child in that child's native language. What it says is figure out a way to capture the intelligence that child has and fashion it so that you can make yourself understood and teach that child who doesn't yet understand a whole lot of English. So it can be any number of different programs, as we said earlier. It's not just teach that child in that child's native language, zip, that's it. It's use what you need to, the tools you need to transition that child into full English instruction.
So the UNCE initiative then is particularly narrow and limited in its approach, because it seems to me that at least in the way it's positioned in California, it talks pretty much about Spanish. It doesn't deal with the broader issues. And if it were to pass, what are the implications at the national policy level in terms of resources available for education?
Yeah. And let's make it real clear. Let's understand. I am one who does not support the UNCE initiative after having looked at it and having done a lot of work on the issue of bilingual education. It's a cookie-cutter approach. It says one size will fit all. This is a way where we'll teach all children who have a limited English proficient background, and this is the way all kids in the state, not just those who are limited English proficient, will be taught, because once you've gotten 1 year of instruction, whether you know English well or not, you're thrown into the regular course. The other thing that should be of concern to a lot of folks is that the initiative will allow people to sue teachers. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm in college right now and I'm preparing to teach and make a salary of somewhere starting off in the low 20s or so, it's not a lucrative business, but I love it that I have a chance to help children. I'm less likely to want to do this if I know that I can be subjected to a lawsuit at any point in time simply because I try to help a child quickly transition into English in whatever fashion I thought was best. That's a dangerous, I think, precedent to set, to allow people to just sue a teacher because maybe I don't like the way you're teaching something. That's a concern. Another concern is what is good for a 7-year-old may not be good for an 11-year-old. What is good for someone who knows some English may not be good for someone who knows more English. What is good for someone who knows little English certainly will not be good for someone who knows only English. And unfortunately, because it's a cookie-cutter approach, one-size-fits-all approach, all those kids are combined. You'll have a 7-year-old in the same classroom as an 11-year-old. So who do you teach? Or are you teaching the 11-year-old 7-year-old material? It's a difficult question to try to just say we're going to lump you all together, because as we know, especially in California, we've got a diversity of people, a diversity of thought. How you do it with a cookie-cutter approach, I don't see it.
Henry, that gives us kind of an overview of the discussion I had with Xavier in Washington, D.C. But I think it might be good for our viewers to hear, and Xavier has stated in that particular piece that he was decidedly opposed to the initiative. So I think as a starting point for our local discussion here, it'd be interesting to hear from the pro side of the initiative. And basically what I'm taking out of that interview now is the central question about the initiative itself. Is it a policy issue, or is it an attempt to to try to handle fixing the mechanics of bilingual education in the state?
Well, I think it's a little of both if you look at the initiative. Those that are opposed it seem to really feel that if you teach subject matter content in native language over a period of 3, 4, or 5 years, that at some time that knowledge will transfer over into English, because the primary instruction is in the kid's native language. And there's very little English involved in this process until a later time. This is a waste of time because the kid eventually is going to have to learn it again in English. The biggest problem is that when you're dealing with 5-year-olds, 6 and 7, which here in Los Angeles, 60% of the elementary school kids are of Spanish-speaking, bilingual in some cases, monolingual in others. But if the 60% of these kids can only speak one language, and basically it's Spanish, then why continue to give them Spanish or even give them subject matter content in Spanish for a period of 2 or 3 years? It seems foolish. If you wish to teach them English as soon as possible, then begin by teaching them English. They speak Spanish at home. They read Spanish in many cases. They watch Spanish TV. They talk to each other in Spanish. When are they going to get the English knowledge? And I feel that if you waste that period of time, that window of opportunity, which is between 5, 6, and 7 years old, and do not teach them English sufficiently strong enough. I'm not talking about survival English. I'm talking about good, strong English plus reading and writing. You're going to have a kid that by the time he gets to junior high school will be put in remedial classes. And that's what's happened after 30 years.
Let me ask you this question, because the initiative points to a 1-year period in which they'll be allowed to make this transition. As Xavier pointed to, you can't put the same suit of clothes on every student. Do you think that 1 year is sufficient to transition 100% of the native language speaking kids to English?
Yes. If you look at the initiative, it says not normally to exceed 1 year. These kids will be tested. If those kids can move in the direction of English-only classes, then it's not normally to exceed 1 year. They will be moved if they can. If they can't, who's going to say that they can remain a second year? The initiative doesn't say a second year, but it does say not normally to exceed 1 year. 1 year can include, remember, you're dealing with an entire year. For those of us that have to take foreign language to get into college, we don't take it 1 hour a day. This is going to be immersion where they're in that class for 5, 6 hours a day learning English. And they also will have the experience of, if they wish, after-school tutoring, or like in high school, come in on Saturday classes, or summer school. It's 1 year that they have this opportunity to learn English well enough. And for most kids, research says, for most kids that are first grade, second grade, third grade, kindergarten, they learn very fast. They can pick it up easily and move on. Most of the students in some of the classes that I've visited were born here. They're American citizens. They were born here of migrant parents. Why should they be put into Spanish-only classes? When will they learn English well enough to succeed in junior high? And then they're in high school and consequently eventually in college.
Let me ask Jose, Henry points to the fact that it sounds like he's saying that it's an either-or kind of proposition. So you're either teaching them in their native language and then the introduction to English is slow, it's not full immersion. Former teacher, now with the union, what is your take as the opposition to those particular allegations?
Well, actually, first of all, I'm still a teacher. I'm on leave from my teaching position. So I've been a teacher, and I've been a teacher for 5 years. I'm just taking the last month or so off until the proposition, working on this specific issue. As far as teaching the kids what ESL is, we teach them for a certain period of time, and that's mandated period of time within the master plan for the school district.
In English, you're
In
saying.
English,
Right.
ESL,
Yeah.
we teach.
Right.
There is a section in there, and I teach 6, 7, and 8 years old. I've taught second grade, third grade, fourth grade, which is my main focus area. What I do in there, I teach them in their primary language, and all these skills that I do teach them, once they acquire the English language, which within the master plan it says it'll take 3 to 4 years, not much more than what Mr. Gradillas is saying. But once they acquire the skills, they are the same, and they absolutely and positively do transfer. If you teach a kid what a sentence is, you teach them where the capital letter goes, where the period goes, and which is the focus in second grade, teaching them sentence structure, paragraph writing, putting their thoughts together, organizational structure, organizing their stories, paragraphs, things like that. If you teach them about the pilgrims and social studies, if you teach them about science, what weighs more, a rock or a feather, all that, once they learn between piedra and rock, once they learn the difference, sure, that transfer, that absolutely positively transfers. There is no doubt. I've seen it. I see it in my classroom every day. As far as transferring, yeah, it goes straight through. ESL, we do teach the kids ESL. We teach them every day. That is mandated. We have to teach them 3 things every day: ESL, PE of all things, and language arts, which are the 3 things that are the focus in our bilingual classroom. As far as leaving our school, I work at Belvedere Elementary, and as far as I know, at Belvedere Elementary, which also feeds into Garfield High School, which is where you were principal of, our kids will leave our school with a knowledge of Spanish, ability to write, to read, and understand Spanish, and they do leave our school with the ability to write and read and understand English. They are better prepared to go into junior high. Now, the focus is, are there some kids that do not reach that goal? Sure there are. There are some kids that do not reach that goal, just like they would have if it was not a bilingual program. If they would have, the issues are a lot more than just a bilingual program. They will have gone through, I mean, there's problems in the neighborhood, there's problems in the area, there's social economic issues that come up. And some of those kids, and I have them in my classroom, I see them every day, no matter what I do, I can sit there and try to do backflips to teach them how to do math or something. They have learning disabilities, they have psychological problems, they have emotional problems, and that stems not from the bilingual program itself, but from other factors that affect the community in which we live.
Maribel, let me get you into the conversation here. You're from MALDEF, and so you're neither an educator in this particular vein on either side of this issue, but you're kind of illustrate, or at least point for our viewers, what is MALDEF's concern about this particular issue, and what do you see as the heart of the issue?
First of all, as you pointed out earlier, just with regards to the conversation that was taking place, right now, by law, school districts, schools are required to teach children English. That's not even the issue. By law, schools are required to teach children English. Everyone agrees children should learn English. That is not the issue. From MALDEF's perspective, Proposition 227 is very dangerous. As Xavier mentioned, first of all, it strips school districts and parents of the right to select the program that best fits the needs of their student population. This initiative is intended to affect over 1.4 million children throughout the state of California. We're talking about rural communities, we're talking about inner cities, elementary schools, high schools. We're talking about differences that are tremendous, and that school districts that have spent years developing a curriculum that's effective in teaching their students English and making sure that they advance academically, they're going to be dismantled completely. Not only bilingual education, but all current language development programs that are working, that have proven that to teach students English. Proposition 227 will eliminate that. We're also extremely concerned about the lawsuit that you mentioned. Any teacher who refuses to teach only in English, any teacher who tries to explain to a child a math problem, for example, can be sued by any parent or guardian. That is for attorney's fees. They will be personally liable. That's certainly a disincentive to bring in qualified teachers. And finally, this is a very costly initiative. It calls for retention of all current funding for bilingual education. So taxpayers will not save a penny because we're going to retain it. The initiative specifically says it. But it takes $50 million a year for 10 years from the General Education Fund. That makes no sense.
I want to come back to the $50 million and the whole cost issue, but I want to stay with the content, the idea of the program here. And Henry, I noticed you shaking your head about the when Maribel mentioned the idea of the lawsuits, and the teachers would be exposed
the
to lawsuits.
look, let's put it this way. The initiative clearly states that the teacher, if any teacher or if any district administrator, principal, or superintendent, if they continually refuse to implement 227, then there'll be litigation. But it says that a teacher must overwhelmingly teach in English. That is not what's being done right now, particularly in the elementary schools. So if you teach overwhelmingly in English, it does not say there that you can use Spanish or American Sign Language as the two language of this country, or use French or German or anything to embellish the course, to enrich the course, to make it more interesting. If you have this fear that a teacher will be sued if she says a word or two, I mean, that's not what the initiative says. Anything to teach the kid, but instruction, the books, the lessons, the tests themselves will be in English, and that's what we want.
Let me ask this question, though. It seems to me that there's some break in the logic here that I hear, at least in the numbers, because on the one hand, you know, I hear that that bilingual teachers are underrepresented in the teaching population. And then you're saying now that the predominant language that education is taught in for these students is Spanish.
Yes.
So, I mean, how do you reconcile the fact that we don't have enough Spanish teachers, but the predominant teaching is done in Spanish, therefore we need the initiative?
The problem is for those that are teaching right now, this is what they rely on. The lesson plans are in Spanish. I have visited them. Some of them are not doing a very good job because they don't have that kind of skill to be able to teach both languages well. And therefore the kid, after 2 or 3 years, ends up not learning either language well. See, the situation is in a true bilingual class, like we were mentioning before, and there are some here in the state of California. True bilingual classes cost money. The teachers must be well educated in both languages. Kids spend more time because it takes twice as long to teach both languages to a student, particularly when you're beginning to teach subject matter content. The problem is that after the first few years, this doesn't become cost effective. If a person were in junior high or in high school, it would be impossible to teach bilingual biology. You'd have to teach it in regular biology in English. The problem comes in, though, if a person has not learned by the time he's in high school to properly read and write and speak in English, there is no way these counselors are going to put him into chemistry or physics. That's what was wrong with Garfield High School.
Well, let me ask, because the question, it seems to me, it begs the question that is this a language problem or is this under-resourced problem? And, you know, if as Xavier had said and Maribel and Jose say that it takes 3 to 4 years, how come we can't get it done in the 3 to 4 year period, which would be elementary school ideally, and then you make the transition to English and you put the resources in the first 4 to 5, even 6 years, so that you do have well-trained teachers?
I understand, but the biggest problem is that it doesn't transfer that readily when the kids are brought up this way, when you give primary instruction in their native language. That's been the problem. They don't transfer over. In other words, you have to kind of go over and repeat it again, and by that time you've lost these 3 or 4 years. They become critical. And all research shows that it could be done easier as they're younger.
How do you know it doesn't? I'm just trying to follow the logic. Wait. I'm just trying to follow the logic here. So we have programs that are under-resourced. We have programs that have teachers that are undertrained, that are teaching bilingual education, and the conclusion you're reaching is that bilingual education doesn't transfer. But how can you say that if those other factors that are broken are also in the environment? How do you get a clean evaluation of what works and doesn't?
I think you want me to say this, and I'll say it because I've said it before. Bilingual education as a part of the total educational system that this country, you know, gives our students is not the major issue that's causing the problems of our kids not being well educated. You and I know it's rigor, it's attendance policies, it's the gang related, it's the kids not wanting to go to school, it's parents that can't have that hold on their kids. There's a lot of it, forcing kids not to take these other classes by not giving them the rigor that is necessary to move in these classes or giving them choice. It's the grad requirements that require 2 years of graduation, 2 years of mathematics in high school to graduate without stipulating what those 2 years will be. So they take it in consumer math, baby math, ridiculous math. They don't take it in algebra, geometry, or where it should be. Those are, I think, the main problems in education. I'm a curriculum specialist. I got my doctorate in that. However, that's not on the ballot right now. What is on the ballot is bilingual ed, and that is a portion that drastically interferes, in my point of view, and in the years that I've had experience, which interferes with a person also progressing in learning English well enough to be able to succeed.
Go ahead, Maribel.
I think he just said it beautifully. There are so many problems and we need to fix our public education. And what is on the ballot on June 2nd is Proposition 227, a proposition, an educational requirement that'll sweep across California with no research, no educational basis. The initiative, in fact, to further illustrate how unsound this initiative is and what chaos it'll cause, this initiative permits school districts to mix children of different ages and different grade levels in one classroom, with the only restriction being their level of fluency. There is no restriction in terms of age. These students will not receive the academic curriculum that it'll take to take the calculus and the algebra to go on to college. If in fact we were concerned about these students doing well and taking calculus, we need to continue to provide them with this academic instruction and not permit this unguided, unrestricted mixing of children of different ages. That is educationally unsound.
Jose, and I'll come back to you on this, Henry, but Jose, so speaking to Maribel's point about the mixing of ages, how important is that as a factor? And I'm just harking back to, you know, my parents growing up, and they had one-room schoolhouses where, you know, you taught from, you know, elementary all the way through high school. How important is that issue of mixing ages in 1990?
It is very, very important. One of the things, and we just went through a classroom selection at our school, one of the things that most teachers try to avoid is a combination class. And you're just talking about two grades, third, fourth, fifth, because of whatever the student population is. And most teachers want to avoid those kinds of classrooms because it is very difficult. You need to follow the curriculum for one grade and another grade. Now you have some kids from K through fifth. That is just amazing to be able to put them in there. You know, if anybody has kids or you have some children, when you take them somewhere, you do something with them, you're going to address different levels. You take them to a movie, you're going to take the fifth grader to a different movie than you do the kindergarten. It's just different mentality, different attention span, different ways of approaching them, different ways. I mean, with a kindergarten, you're going to use a lot of manipulators, a lot of tools, a lot of hands-on things. With a fifth grader, you're going to lecture to them. You're going to tell them a lot more things that they're going to be able to understand. Their attention span will be a lot longer. Now, how are you going to prepare a lesson to address all those? It's going to be a nightmare. It'll be very, very difficult to do.
See, the initiative clearly states that districts are permitted to do this if they wish. Obviously, in a school district as large as LA here, you already have the classes there. The class is there. It's a homogeneous class learning Spanish, basically, because most of the kids there speak Spanish. All we're saying is have that teacher now predominantly teach in English. There's no moving of kids around. But in smaller schools, just as you mentioned, the small school, in areas where you have small districts, where you have rural areas, what's going to keep a district saying, well, I can't teach immersion program in English because I have too few kids? You may be permitted to mix a fifth grader and a sixth grader and a seventh grader as long as they're in the same level of English proficiency. What is that going to hurt? For that year, they're going to be taking English proficiency, they're going to be learning English well enough, and they're going to be learning their alphabet. I mean, that first year, a lot of it's going to be language acquisition, how to speak, how to read, how to write. And the subject matter content will be also brought in there sparingly to make sure that they keep up. But once they learn sufficient English, they can keep up a lot faster by moving those 3 or 4 years in English-only classes than in continuing another 3 or 4 years in Spanish and then deciding to transfer over. It just doesn't work. It hasn't been. Practically, it doesn't work. And we've seen the results of how many kids are classified as fluent English speakers in the state of California. What is it, 6%? Santa Barbara with 2,800 limited English-speaking students. At the end of 1 year, only 6% were actually reclassified into fluent English. It doesn't work. It isn't working. It's getting worse, and it's been on the books for 30 years. It expired in 87, and it's still on the books. It continues to be funded because the legislature refuses to do anything about it because of the conflicts. Well, this initiative will do something about it. In fact, the governor already vetoed a bill. The courts have already said, hey, we're not going to be requiring school districts to mandate them to give bilingual ed. The legislature are saying, let's draw some more. It's a wonderful thing. This bill does anything. It's waking up the American people to say, hey, we got to look at a program that hasn't worked for 30 years, and we're going to substitute it with something that others say might not work at all, but at least it's a change. And I'm pretty sure that if those kids are put into English only with the same caring teachers we have now, it'll work, and those kids will move a lot faster than they're moving now.
Maribel, we're going to break in 1 minute, but I want to give you a chance to comment on this notion of moving to change into something that we don't have any track record on. What are your...
I've listened to Mr. Gradillas explain his view of the world and his view of educational policy a few times, and sometimes I agree that it makes sense. What he's saying sometimes makes sense. Unfortunately, what he says is completely inconsistent with what's in Proposition 227. The reality is that if Proposition 227 were to pass on June 2nd, that is what becomes the law. not what Mr. Gradillas suggests, that their rural schools may be permitted, but urban schools may not. That restriction's not in the initiative. The after-school programs, the Saturday programs, that's not in the initiative. What he says, unfortunately, is not written in there, and that is what would become law. And I think it's really interesting that we have a bipartisan bill coming out of the legislators that took a significant amount of time, that brought in researchers to have educational policy, and Governor Pete Wilson vetoed it.
Maribel, before we go to break, we have, is it Zaja on the line?
Hi.
Hi, welcome to Media One-on-One. You have a question for our guest?
Yes. My question is, actually, I'm not agree with bilingual education. I'm actually right now I'm learning English. I'm here for 1 year, and I believe bilingual education is going to stop learning for students. But my question is, do you think only 1 year is going to be enough for them to, after that, they're going to throw the student to the regular classes?
Henry, let's direct that question to you, and then, Jose, you can...
Yeah, as I said before, if you're talking about the little kids, the kindergarten, first, second, third, 1 year is sufficient for them to learn, particularly when 60% of them in many of the classes are already American-born, American citizens that should be given this opportunity to learn English. For the high schoolers, or those people that come into this country at a later age, you know, you can begin to look at waivers to get them into bilingual programs. But to me, personally, this is going to take an extra year or two. Why not bring them in a quick submersion program and then into the classes of straight English?
Jose, is 1 year sufficient?
No, it's not sufficient. Absolutely not. There is no way a child can learn. You know, and as an adult coming into this country, you come in and you go through a program to learn a language. Sure, you'll be able to speak it and talk it, but if are you able to pick up a book and read it in another language? You will not. And we're not talking here about verbal speaking or verbal communication. We're talking about an academic knowledge of the language. We're talking about reading, writing it, learning it from an academic perspective. Now it brings a very...
Before you go there, we have one more caller.
Sure.
Before we go to break. So I think it's Fab from LA. Welcome to Media One-on-One.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate this discussion. First of all, I'm going to say this real quick. Other countries start off at earlier ages teaching different languages with several different levels, and I feel like that will be okay here. But I also would like to have your opinion as to teaching Spanish to English-speaking children. What about that, reversing the role?
We currently have programs throughout California. We have a diversity of programs. We have the dual immersion that allows monolingual English-speaking students to learn Spanish. We have some great programs throughout California that will be completely dismantled. You're absolutely right. It seems kind of ironic that as we move on to a global economy, as we rely more on foreign trade, that California wants to be the one state that prohibits students from learning more than one language. We should be encouraging students to learn 2 and 3 different languages.
Henry?
The initiative plainly states that if a kid already knows, a student already knows English, and he wishes now to learn a language other than his own in elementary school, that it's wonderful to do that if the parents wish to put him in there.
Well,
this is a reverse of what it is now.
Let me ask the question this way, because as Maribel points out, and we recognize the world's getting smaller, that the English culture, American culture, is one of the few countries where multiple languages isn't the norm. You go to Europe and people are speaking 3 or 4 different languages. What are your thoughts about having a standard that would immerse English-dominant speakers in foreign language is the same way they're talking about immersing Spanish speakers in English?
Yes, that is outstanding, because these researchers have known for years that if a person begins to learn another language early enough other than his own, he will be able to master that language. So therefore, we should be putting more effort and money into elementary school to get those monolingual students to learn another language. There's no problem with that. I'm working in Duluth, Minnesota, and we got programs in there right now that we're working particularly in this area. See, I've never said that it was anti-bilingualism. The more languages you know, multilingual, multilingualism, to me it's great, but if you want to succeed in this country, if you really want to make money here, if you're multilingual, one of those languages has got to be English, or you won't be able to capitalize on your multilingual abilities.
Well, when we come back from break, I want to talk about what are some of the implications with the implementation. So let's assume that the bill passes, and then let's assume that it doesn't pass, and what do we do to make some of the corrections? But don't go away. We'll be right back with today's topic, Proposition 227, the Bilingual Education Initiative. Stay with us and do join in the conversation after the break. All right. Obviously, the conversation's been very lively while you've been away, but welcome back to today's topic, Proposition 227, the Bilingual Education Initiative. I'm Perry Parks, your host. We encourage you to participate in our discussion with our guests because they've been participating without you, for sure. Once again, the viewer call-in number is area code 310-216-3590. Again, that's area code 310-216-3590. Our state has approximately 1.4 million English-speaking students. That's more than the total public school population of about 38 states. It is estimated that there is only one bilingual teacher for every 92 students, leaving a high percentage of children without any special assistance to obtain fluency in English. Governor Pete Wilson just vetoed a bill passed by the State Assembly that would have given local schools the freedom to implement bilingual instruction according to their needs. Will a state-controlled mandate be more successful than leaving it up to local schools to decide what the individual needs are for their non-English speaking students? So, I mean, I think that we've kind of arrived at that juncture here, and what are your takes on that? Will a state initiative really be more effective than allowing local control of the issue, of this particular issue?
Well, one of the reasons I feel that the governor vetoed that is because there would be the status quo. Just continue the same thing. See, what started the initiative in the first place? It was parents that boycotted a school for over 2 weeks because they were refused their chance of moving their kids into English-only classes. They were tired of having their kids come home with homework, everything in Spanish. When are they going to learn English? And after 2 or 3 years, no, this is the problem. Right. So they decided that, hey, I want my kids in English classes. I don't want them to work like, I talked to a parent that's working in the sweatshops there on 7th and Maple in the garment district. She doesn't want her child to be there. When is he going to learn English? I don't know that much English. I'm forced to do this. What's wrong with teaching kids English as soon as possible?
But we have 180 days.
Jose, we have let's get Estella. Estella, right. Welcome to Media One-on-One.
Good evening. How are you?
Good. Do you have a question for our guest?
Well, a comment and a question. What I see is a lot of people getting all hyped up about bilingual education and demanding it. As a Hispanic, I say, why? Who are we to demand bilingual education? As a child, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as bilingual education. I spoke primarily Spanish as a child. In the household, it was nothing but Spanish. And, of course, I went to school and learned English. As you can see, I speak English very well, and I'm proud to say I speak Spanish very well as well. I didn't lose either one of my languages or the culture. And why is it mostly the Hispanics that are demanding bilingual education? I don't see Orientals demanding it. I don't see any other races making such a big deal about it.
Well, let me go to Jose with that question, Estella. Dominated by Spanish for sure, given the size of the population.
Absolutely.
Is there concern on the part of other ethnic foreign language speaking minorities?
There is concern. First of all, let me address the first part, then I'll go ahead and do that. As far as who are we, what are we are also voters, we are taxpayers, we are in this country. I came here to this country when I was 8 years old, so also went through a bilingual program. I'm able to either both speak English and Spanish, so yeah, I wanted it, I got it, it works. And then as far as other ethnicities, other races that are working on this, I went to a press conference which was held last week at Castro Elementary, in particular the Chinatown area, and there was media from Korea, from China, from a variety of different Asian-speaking languages, and they were adamantly opposed to this. They had a press conference there with reporters and representatives from every different sector of the Asian community. So they are very concerned. Obviously, we don't see them as much. We're not in tune with it because they are a small group within the bilingual education program. And anytime you look at bilingual education, it's going to be focused towards Latinos, Hispanics, Mexicans.
How many different languages are spoken in the LA Unified School District? Is there any?
Well, when I was at Birmingham, we had 42 different nationalities.
Up to now, the languages that are spoken in LA Unified, the last I knew, there were 87. 87 different languages.
And the only basic one, the Latino, gets put into these 3 or 4 years of bilingual stuff and the others are put into English only, and guess what the results are at the end of the 2 or 3 year period?
But that is because we do not have the funding. We have 1.4 million students that need this type of education.
Yeah, and only a third are getting it.
We are only getting 30%.
Only a third are getting it. This would bring them all under the umbrella of immersion.
Mr. Gradillas, if you implement this proposition and you only fund it at 30%, how do you think it will function?
Who's going to fund it at 30%?
Well, whatever you do, if you only put 30% of the effort into it, it is not going to function.
Let's move then to this question. Let's assume for a moment here that the initiative passes and it goes into effect. I guess it's going to be January.
No, within 2 months after.
2 months. Okay, 60 days. Okay,
60
it goes
days.
into effect
So by
60
September,
days.
when the next school year starts,
Okay,
they should be
all right,
implementing
so
this
June,
if it passes.
so by September of 1998, it would have to be implemented. What are the consequences of that particular implementation? What can a parent look forward to, or what should a parent be anticipating with an implementation happening in 60 days?
They can be expecting complete chaos. I have gone out to the different school districts throughout California talking to superintendents on their interpretation of the initiative and what they expect will happen, given the fact that the initiative is so vaguely worded. Okay, it's so vaguely worded, and if that were the only issue, we might be able to resolve it. But school districts have to figure out how to implement this program, how to completely eliminate, because it's going to be costly, to eliminate what they currently do and implement a new program within 60 days with the threat of a lawsuit if they fail to implement this vague statute. Who will come in and sue them? People like Mr. Gradillas, people like Mr. Unz, who will want to make an example out of the school districts that have a true commitment to teaching their students English. It will be complete chaos, not only for the limited English proficient students, who, according to this initiative, can be warehoused for an entire year. And your last caller says, we Hispanics want bilingual education. No, equality of education, access to the core curriculum that all the other children are having. Proposition 227 is not about bilingual education. It's about warehousing children for an entire year and denying them academic instruction.
Henry, so it's now June 8th. The initiative passed. And you were principal, so putting that principal's hat on, what do you see would have to occur between June 8th and September to have your school plant ready to implement this particular
Progressive districts, okay, progressive districts have already got a lot of plans going on right now because they knew this was coming way back in, in the summer of last year. If they waited this long, yeah, they're going to have some problems if they waited for the last summer waiting saying hopefully it's defeated. But that's ridiculous. I mean, there should always be plans, and that's what's wrong with some of the districts. You know, they're not planning hard enough. What I see is this, and I really mean this because I've been to these schools and I've seen it. It shouldn't be any chaos whatsoever. You keep the same teacher assistants. Now you just tell them you're going to keep your same pay for what you're doing, but now you're going to concentrate on English for these kids rather than Spanish. I was in a class where the teacher met these kids and said, "Buenos días, alumnos, ¿cómo estamos? ¿Cómo pasaron la semana? Vamos a hablar sobre los colores," and started teaching the colors. Everything was in Spanish, and I waited to see, was this the introduction? No. English is only taught there for 1 hour a day. Instead, Spanish is taught for the remaining of the school day.
No, but is that a management issue? Is that a
Yes, it's management. And now all the teachers got to do is use it the other way around. Spend 60 and 80% of the time teaching the same class that she has in her room in English rather than in Spanish.
That's not what the initiative calls for. That is not what where does it say 80% English and 20% Spanish?
Or 90%.
You don't say that. It does not say that on the initiative.
Time out. We have Elaine here. Let's get another viewer's perspective on this. Elaine, welcome to Media One-on-One.
Good evening to all of you. I'm very concerned about this Spanish-English program. Frankly speaking, I would prefer that the children learn to speak more Asian languages. After all, they are the ones who carry most of the money and most of the business. I think we're putting too much emphasis on American people having to speak Spanish, and frankly, I resent it. And that's all I have to say. Good luck on the answer.
All right, thank you.
I agree with that. But you see, the Asian culture, they will learn, the parents will take the responsibility of keeping that culture alive. I know that they have Japanese school on Saturdays. My association with many of the Asia when I was here in Alhambra in Monterey Park is that they want the schools to teach their kids English so they'll have a much better shot at moving on, like she is saying. And why shouldn't we teach you know, kids other language other than Spanish. But what I'm saying, it's easy.
What you're pointing to now here is that you make reference to the fact that the Japanese culture will keep the culture alive. Now, is that to say that the Latino culture won't, or any other group will not keep the culture alive?
No, but there is some fear that if you do not continue, that the schools, if they do not continue to provide language maintenance in Spanish for their kids, that the kids will be too Anglicanized. They will begin to learn English too well and will forget their culture. And I'm saying to them, you know, why would you like language maintenance at the expense of English? I sure want one for my kids. I want them to learn English and they're going to live here well enough and hopefully maintain their culture. Hopefully.
Jose, is that really the view of the opponents?
No, it's not. Maintaining English, yeah, that's great. You talk to any bilingual educator, anybody who's involved with bilingual education, they want the kids to learn English. That is not, we're not trying to keep them from learning English. Now, as far as a multilingual society, multilingual culture, multilingual world that we live in, we need to know that. We need to learn that.
Well, why not teach it?
We are teaching it. That's exactly what we're doing. We are teaching the Spanish language. Yes, some kids come in, we say buenos dias, como están, all this stuff. That's great. We do that. We also teach English. We are teaching English. Now, the programs that you alluded to earlier, where they were pulled out and were able to learn English and were put in English class, the one that you alluded to, they didn't redesignate anybody. They did not redesignate anyone.
I have another question.
How was it that, how were they prepared? How were they prepared not to go into another English class? They did not redesignate anyone.
And the Alice Callahan kids from 9th Street School that you're talking about, those are the children we're talking about that you harmed, that you hurt because they are the ones that scored the lowest on the exams.
Alice Callahan's position is that she's a proponent of 227. Right. She says that these kids need to be taught English and they're being delayed that.
But the difference, I don't know who he's speaking to about retaining the culture, because the parents that we have worked with, and we work with a lot of parents throughout California and throughout Texas of children who are limited English proficient, guess what they want? They want their children to learn math. They want their children to learn English. They are not worried about their children working in the garment industry. They're worried about preparing their child to be doctors and lawyers and getting into college. It infuriates me to no end when I hear the proponents of Proposition 227 set the standard at a garment industry. That's what you continue to hear. These children should not be working at a garment industry. That's a given. These children should be doctors and lawyers, but if they're not provided the math and the science, if they are prohibited and denied for an entire academic year, they cannot catch up. That is not equality. We're not talking about here. They frame the question as Spanish only. We have Asian bilingual classes. We have a wonderful Armenian bilingual program. All these programs are intended to teach children English, but advance them academically.
So I want to go back to the cost here. Now, the one model that I've read about has been the model in Orange County, where they have moved to a full immersion program similar in nature, at least in the reading, to what 227 proposes. And what does that experience look like? Have you looked at it, Jose?
No, I have not. I'm not.
All we know is that the teachers have certainly been leaving the school district, that parents have pulled their children out of the school district because they know the harm that will cause in placing these children in these classes. We don't hear them talking about all the over 300 parents who have to pull their children out of public schools because their children are not being taught the academic instruction.
What do you hear, Henry?
I hear that whenever there's, like you say, chaos and the problem, that problem exists because people don't put their whole hearts into a program. And I think when you have
they haven't done to the bilingual program.
No, you have done this.
haven't done
teachers,
to the bilingual program.
Teachers right now are not willing. They say, we're going to, I get into my room and I close that door and I'm going to do what I want to do. The problem that we see now is that when the students begin to know that they're going to be in that class and they have X number of months or a year to learn what has to be learned, you're beginning to see an improvement. Why? Because it's done in English. It's not going to take that length of time to move these kids into English only, since they're already from day one beginning to study that in English. That is critical to be able to analyze the nuances of the language. If these kids miss that, and they miss those 3 or 4 vital years of learning this, when are they going to get it? They're sure not going to get it in junior high, because there they do the same thing. I've known kids, many kids, hundreds of kids that have been in this country for 5 and 6 years that still can't read or write English well enough to be put into classes where they can absorb the math and the science. She talks about academic advancement. What academic advantage do you have for young kids that are studying in the first year immersion in English? It's basic language acquisition. You don't start teaching calculus at that age group, but I'm telling you this, and I understand this very, very closely, that if you teach these kids in Spanish sufficiently long enough, when will the transition period come across where they learn English? It doesn't come across. And when it finally does, they're too far behind.
Let me give you an analogy real quick. And this is talking to some people. About 10, 15 years ago, they came out with this problem with science. We don't have enough women in science. Women cannot get in science. Now, it would have been ludicrous to get little girls into science and say, you know what, you guys aren't doing it. You're not learning the science. You're not getting that through. It would have been ludicrous to stop science, to say, you know what, you're not doing it. You're not going to learn English, you're not going to learn math, you're not going to learn health, you're not going to do anything else. Get into a classroom and spend 180 days, and that's when we're going to get you up to par with the rest of the kids in your class, and they would have been a grade level behind. Now, nobody in this country would have gone for a proposition. Now, in essence, that's what you're trying to do to the kids. You are saying, forget math, forget science, forget health. We are going to teach you this particular subject because I'm sorry, you just can't learn it any other way. And we're telling you, we know what you're doing. We're going to do it this way, and that's it. It would have been teaching kids science in one particular methodology, not the teacher doing their lesson.
You want to teach that girl science,
and we're going to wrap after this comment, so I'm going to give you a chance to have the last comment, so go ahead.
No, I'm just saying this analogy. There's nothing wrong with a person knowing, like soccer. If he knows soccer, he wants to come to the United States, he can't play soccer because as a high school, so he wants to get into high school football. Obviously, his knowledge of soccer, you know, he's a senior or a high school student, his knowledge of soccer will help. We here hire kids to kick the ball for goals because they're good soccer kickers. And then he's going to transfer a lot of these traits into what he already knows, the physical ability, the running ability, the kicking ability. But let's say this student comes to us, he doesn't know anything about soccer as far as playing it. See, my proponents think that
I'm going to have to wrap here, Henry.
That it's best to do what? It's best to teach them soccer for 2 years in order to learn American football. No, put them right in American football.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this particular edition, so we'll have to wait till June 2nd to see how this works out. But as our viewers, you can see this issue is a live issue, and you're going to have to sort it out for yourself, and I would say vote your conscience on this one. Today's program will be rebroadcast over this and numerous other channels, including the California channel. Watch for days and times at the end of the program. Be sure to join us again on Tuesday, June 2nd at 7 p.m. And thank you for joining us today, and have a good evening.